I'm Hannah Seabrook, 53, and I spent 32 years in the United States Army, rising to the rank of Major General, while the family I came from called it playing soldier. For most of my life, I gave them my silence and asked for nothing in return. But when a young Marine waved me off at the gate of the very war college I had come to command, and the truth surfaced in front of everyone, I finally stopped making myself small. Have you ever been underestimated by the people who should have known you best? If so, tell me your story in the comments. You are not alone. Before I get into what happened, let me know where you are tuning in from. And if you have ever had to stand up for yourself after being wronged, hit that like button and subscribe. The night before I took command of a war college, I laid my service coat over the back of a motel chair and sat looking at the 2 stars on the shoulder boards until the ice machine down the hall finally went quiet. It was the first week of May, 2026, and I had driven myself the whole way. 6 hours with the radio off because I wanted the time to think. For most of my life, the people who shared my last name believed the Army was the thing I did until I came to my senses. I had stopped waiting for them to change their minds somewhere around my 40th birthday. What I had not stopped doing, apparently, was bracing for it. I grew up in a house where worth was measured in diplomas, and the diplomas they respected all had the word medicine somewhere on them. My mother, Genevieve, came from a line of physicians and married into another one, and she ran our home the way a chief of surgery runs a ward, with standards, with a chart for everyone, with a quiet column where she kept track of who was meeting expectations and who was not. My older sister, Beatrice, met them. Beatrice was 4 years ahead of me, brilliant with her hands, the kind of person who knew at 14 that she would cut people open to save them. And our mother held her up the way you hold up a lamp so the rest of us could see by her light. I was the other one. I read history instead of biology. I liked maps and the reasons countries went to war and the strange, stubborn courage of people who walked toward danger when every sensible instinct said to walk away. When I was small, I did not have language for any of that. I only knew that the dinner table conversation about cell structure and residency placements went on without me, and that nobody seemed to notice when I stopped trying to join it. The one person who noticed was my father. Walter Seabrook taught high school history for 31 years, and before that, a long time before that, he had been a drafted soldier in a war he rarely spoke about. He came home from it and put on a tie and stood in front of teenagers for 3 decades, and the only sign of the other life he had lived was the way his face changed when the evening news showed soldiers somewhere far away. He would go very still, and then he would get up and go out to his workshop in the garage, and sometimes he would not come back in until the house was dark. My father is the reason I am telling you any of this, so I want you to see him clearly. He was not a loud man. He did not argue with my mother about her chart and her columns. But when I was 17 and sat on the workbench stool while he sanded something that did not need sanding, he was the one who asked me what I actually wanted, and then he was the one who actually waited for the answer. Your mother measures people in diplomas, he told me that evening. I stopped doing that in a rice paddy when I was 19 years old. Out there, the only thing that mattered was whether the person next to you would run toward the noise or away from it. He set the sandpaper down and looked at me. The country always needs people who run toward it, Hannah. It never has enough of them. If that is what you are, then be that. Do not let anyone in this house talk you into being a smaller version of yourself just so the table is more comfortable. I have carried those words for 36 years. I carried them the night before I took command, sitting in a motel room with my coat over a chair. The summer I turned 18, in 1990, my mother spread pre-med brochures across the kitchen table like a winning hand of cards. Beatrice was already in medical school by then, 21 and luminous, and my mother kept glancing at her while she talked to me, as if Beatrice were the example and I were the student who had fallen behind. There has never been a soldier in this family, she said. There have been doctors, good ones, people who matter. I did not tell her that I had already requested the reserve officer training packet from the university across the state. I kept it folded inside my coat, against my ribs, and I said nothing, and I let her believe the brochures had landed. That was the first time I did the thing I would do for the next 3 decades. I let her be sure of me because being sure of me made her happy, and her happiness cost me only my own voice, which I had been taught was a fair trade. I want to be honest with you about that, because it took me a very long time to understand that the silence was not peace. It was just postponement. There were small imbalances that told the truth of the house if you knew how to read them. When Beatrice needed help, the family rearranged itself around her. When I needed nothing, which was most of the time, because I had learned that needing nothing was the safest way to exist among them, that was noted with relief and quickly forgotten. I was the one who drove my grandmother to her appointments. I was the one who quietly covered a bill when money was tight one winter and never mentioned it again. I gave, and the giving was received as my nature rather than my effort, and I told myself that this was fine, because my father saw me, and one person seeing you clearly can hold you up for a surprisingly long time. The night I signed my reserve officer training contract, I did it alone at the kitchen table after everyone had gone to bed. I remember the house ticking and settling around me and my father's coffee mug sitting on the counter where he had left it, the only company in the room. I signed my name on the line that committed me to the Army, and I felt something I had not felt at that table in years, which was that I was finally doing a thing because it was mine and not because it kept the chart balanced. I put the pen down. Upstairs, my mother was asleep, certain she had a future doctor under her roof. I sat in the dark a while longer, and then I went up to bed, and in the morning I said nothing, and the postponement went on. What I did not know, sitting at that table at 18, was how long the postponement would last, or what it would finally take to end it. It would take 32 years, 2 wars, a campus full of strangers, and a young man at a gate who had no idea who I was. The early signs were not cruel. That is the thing people miss about being slowly written out of your own family. There is rarely a villain. There is just a story being told over and over with you slightly out of frame, until one day you realize the frame is the whole picture and you were never going to be in it. In 1994, I was 22 years old, and I was commissioned a second lieutenant in the United States Army. I had chosen military intelligence, the branch that lived in maps and patterns and the reasons behind the reasons, the work my father would have loved. The ceremony was small and bright and full of families, and mine sent a card. My mother's handwriting was lovely, it always was, and she wrote that she hoped I would get this out of my system soon and come back to something serious. She did not come. Beatrice did not come. She had rounds. My father drove 6 hours by himself, the same drive I would make decades later, and he stood in that room in his good jacket. And when the time came, he pinned one of my gold bars to my shoulder with hands that were not quite steady. He did not make a speech. He just looked at the bar, and then he looked at me, and he said, "There you are," very quietly, as if he had been waiting a long time to see me arrive. For years after that, the family told a particular version of my life at gatherings. Beatrice, by then an established surgeon, would introduce me to her colleagues with a kind of affectionate dismissal that I do not think she even heard herself doing. "This is my sister. She's in the Army. It is very administrative." Very administrative. I had a security clearance that would have made her colleagues blink, and I was described as a filing system with a uniform. I learned that a person can be fully present in a family and edited out of its story at the same time, standing right there while the narrator trims you down to a footnote. In 2003, I deployed to Iraq. I was a captain by then, 31 years old, and I spent that year doing work I will not detail, except to say that people came home because of patterns I helped find in the noise, and some people did not come home. And I carried both of those facts back with me. I was awarded a Bronze Star. I never mentioned it to my family. I want you to understand that this was not modesty. It was self-protection. I had learned that handing them something I was proud of was like handing it to a person who would set it down on the counter without looking. And I could not bear to watch my own pride be set down like that, so I kept it. I came home from that war to a dinner where my mother asked me gently, in the tone she used for disappointing news, when I was finally going to do something with my mind. I had spent a year using my mind to keep people alive. I folded my napkin in my lap, and I said something neutral. And across the table, Beatrice said, "Mom is only saying what we are all thinking." What we are all thinking. I looked at the faces around that table, the people I had grown up loving, and I understood that the thought they all shared was that my life was a detour I had not yet had the sense to correct. The promotions went the same way. The day I pinned on Brigadier General in 2020, I called home that evening to tell them. My father had been gone a year by then, and I think part of me was calling to fill the silence he had left. My mother said, "That is nice, dear," in the same tone she might have used if I had told her I had repainted a room, and then she spent 10 minutes describing a paper Beatrice had published. I had just become one of a very small number of women ever to wear a star in the United States Army, and it registered in my family as a minor item of news to be gotten past on the way to the real subject. I remember standing in my kitchen with the phone against my ear and a single silver star newly on my shoulder, and laughing a little quietly at the sheer consistency of it. 50 years of the same weather. You learn to stop expecting sun. I did not make a scene. I never made a scene. I had a whole career built on the discipline of not making scenes, of absorbing the dismissal and converting it into fuel and never letting anyone see the conversion happen. I told myself it was strength. Some of it was just a very old wound that had learned to stop bleeding in public. There was a counter thread, though, running quietly under all of it, and I did not learn the full shape of it until after my father was gone. Out in his workshop, on the wall above the bench where he sanded things that did not need sanding, my father had put up a corkboard. And on that corkboard, he had pinned a map of the world. Every time I deployed, every time I finished a course, every time I was sent somewhere or trusted with something, he marked it. A pin for Iraq, a pin for the schoolhouse where I learned my trade, a pin for every place the army sent me. He never told the family he was doing it. He never told me. It was his private rebellion against the chart in the kitchen, a second record of my life kept by the one person who thought it was worth recording. I picture him sometimes standing alone in that workshop late at night, adding a new pin while the house slept, the workshop light burning long after every other window had gone dark. He never said a word about it at dinner. He let my mother run her chart. And then he went out to the garage and quietly kept the true account, the one where his younger daughter was not a detour or a footnote, but a woman moving across the actual map of the actual world, doing the hard thing, running toward the noise, exactly as he had told her she could. I did not know any of this while he was alive. That is the part that still catches me. He carried his pride in me the same way I carried mine, privately, where it could not be set down on a counter. We were more alike than either of us ever managed to say out loud. And the map stayed in the garage, growing year after year, a love letter neither of us knew how to mail. The morning I took command, all of that history was 32 years deep and entirely invisible to the young Marine standing at the gate. To him, I was a plain sedan and a civilian jacket and a woman who had clearly come to the wrong place. And in fairness to him, I had made myself look exactly like that on purpose. I had arrived a full day early, which almost no one does, because I wanted to walk the grounds quietly before the campus knew I was on them. I wanted to stand in the places where I'd once been a student, back in 2014, when I came through the same war college as a lieutenant colonel and graduated at the top of my class, and I wanted to do it without an escort or a flag on the car or anyone calling the campus to attention. So I drove myself, in my own sedan, in my service uniform, with a plain travel jacket, zipped over it so the rank did not show. I had thought of it as humility. I realize now it was also a small, old habit of making myself easy to overlook. The installation gate sat at the end of a tree-lined approach, a brick guardhouse and a striped barrier and the flag snapping overhead in a wind that smelled like cut grass and rain coming. There were 2 Marines on the access control detail. The younger one stepped toward my car as I slowed, and I rolled the window down, and the morning air came in cool and green. His name, I would learn later, was Corporal Cody Vickers. He was 22 years old, which is to say he was exactly the age I had been when my father pinned my bar, and he had the easy, unbothered confidence of a young man who has not yet been surprised by the world. He glanced at my civilian jacket. He glanced at the ordinary car, no government plates, no placard on the dash. He had a picture in his head of who arrived at this gate, and how they arrived, and I did not match it, and so his mind did the thing all our minds do, which is to file me under the nearest available category. Lost visitor. Someone's wife who took a wrong turn. A civilian who did not belong on the cleared side of the barrier. "Wrong gate, ma'am," he said. He was not unkind, he was just casually, completely certain. He half turned and pointed back down the road with the loose authority of youth. "Visitor center's the next entrance down. They will get you sorted out there." There was a moment, and I want to be honest about the moment, where my hand moved toward the inner pocket where my identification was. I could have ended it in 3 seconds. I could have shown him the card that would have changed his entire posture, watched the color drain from his face, made him understand instantly and completely exactly whom he had just waved away. 32 years of being told I was at the wrong gate had built a reflex in me and the reflex wanted, for one bright second, to be seen. I did not do it. I have thought a great deal about why, and the truest answer is that I had spent my whole life being told I was at the wrong gate by people who should have known better. And somewhere along the way, I had learned how to pull aside without making it anyone else's emergency. A 22-year-old doing his job by an honest, imperfect guess did not deserve to be the place where I finally cashed in 3 decades of being underestimated. So I looked at Corporal Vickers, and I smiled, and I said, "Thank you, Corporal." And I put the car in gear and pulled into the visitor lot, off to the side, and turned off the engine and sat for a second in the quiet with my own heartbeat. I did not know yet that the man walking across the lot toward me had served under me in Afghanistan 16 years before. I did not know that the next 90 seconds would do, in front of witnesses, the thing I had just chosen not to do for myself. I only knew that I was early and quiet and exactly where I was supposed to be, even if the young man at the gate did not think so. Lieutenant Colonel Desmond Pike was the installation Provost Marshal, the senior military police officer on the post, the man responsible for good order on every inch of ground I was about to command. He had come out personally to receive the incoming commandant, and he had been told, like everyone else, that I was arriving the next day. So when he saw a woman in a travel jacket climbing out of a plain sedan in the visitor lot, he almost walked right past me, the same honest mistake the corporal had made. And then he saw my face. I watched it happen. I watched him stop, mid-stride, the way a person stops when the world reorganizes itself faster than their feet can keep up. 16 years fell away. He had been a young captain on my security element in Afghanistan, a serious, careful officer I had trusted with things that mattered, and now he was a lieutenant colonel with gray at his temples, and he was looking at me with an expression I had almost never seen aimed at myself inside my own family, which was recognition. He came to attention. He brought his hand up in a salute that was crisp and certain and entirely without hesitation, and his voice carried across the lot. "General Seabrook, we have been expecting you, ma'am." A pause, and then quieter, almost apologetic. "We had you arriving tomorrow. My apologies for the welcome." I returned his salute. And behind him, at the gate, I saw Corporal Vickers go very still. He had heard it. General. He had seen the Provost Marshal of the entire installation come to attention and hold a salute for the woman he had just waved toward the visitor center, and now he was watching me reach up and unzip the travel jacket, because there was no longer any reason to keep it on, and the jacket came open, and the 2 silver stars on my shoulders caught the gray morning light. The other sentry straightened, somewhere a radio crackled, and the young man at the rail understood, all at once and far too late, exactly who had just driven up to his gate. I did not look at him. I want to be clear about that because it is the part I am most at peace with. I did not turn and find his eyes and let him see me see him. There would have been a kind of satisfaction in it, and I had spent a lifetime learning that the satisfaction is never worth what it costs the other person, and that the people most worth respecting are usually the ones who do not need you to watch them be small. So I kept my eyes on Pike. I returned his salute, and I let my hand fall, and I said, "At ease, Colonel. It is good to see you. It has been a long time." Then I asked him for something, quietly, just between us. I asked him to give me a few minutes before he told anyone else I was on the ground. I wanted to walk part of the campus alone first, the way I had come here to do. He said, "Yes, ma'am," and he meant it. And as we turned to walk toward the heart of the post, I felt, rather than saw, the young Marine at the gate standing rigid in the wake of it, the realization landing on him like weather. I left him there with it. I had a war college to take command of, and I did not look back. The commandant's quarters that first evening were too quiet, the way a new place is always too quiet before you have filled it with anything of your own. I unpacked slowly, and the first thing I took out of the boxes, before the uniforms, before anything practical, was my father's corkboard map. I had taken it off the workshop wall after he died in 2019, carried it out to my car, wrapped in a moving blanket, while my mother and sister sorted through the things they considered valuable, and I had kept it ever since. I leaned it against the wall of my new study and stood looking at it. Every pin he had pressed into it in the dark, the private record of a life my family had spent 30 years calling a phase. The gate kept replaying behind my eyes. Not the recognition, the salute, the stars catching the light. That part I could let go of easily, because it had not actually given me anything I needed. What stayed with me was the first part, the easy certainty in the young Marine's voice. "Wrong gate, ma'am. How many times, how many rooms, how many tables?" I had heard a version of that sentence my entire life, and most of the times I had heard it, it had not been corrected 90 seconds later by a man coming to attention. Most of the times, no one had come. I called Yolanda Brooks that night. Yolanda and I had been lieutenants together more than 30 years before, two young women in a world that was not yet built for us, and we had held each other up through all of it. She had retired a colonel a few years back, and she answered the phone the way she always did, with no hello, just, "Tell me about the new kingdom." I told her about the gate. I told her the whole thing, the jacket I had not needed to wear, the corporal, the salute, the stars. I expected her to laugh, and she did, a little, but then she was quiet for a moment, and when she spoke again, her voice had changed. "You know what gets me about that story?" she said. "It is not the Marine. A 22-year-old kid made an honest mistake and corrected it inside of 2 minutes the second he had better information. That is what a decent person does. He saw the truth, and he changed." She let that sit. "Your mother has been making the exact same mistake for 50 years, Hannah. 50 years. And she has had better information the whole time, and she has never once changed." I did not say anything, because there was nothing to say. She had reached into me and put her finger on the thing I had been circling all evening without letting myself name. The wound was never the gate. The gate was just a stranger doing his best with what he could see. The wound was the people who had every reason to know me and had chosen, year after year, not to. "The corporal looked at you for the first time and got it wrong," Yolanda said. "Your family has looked at you 10,000 times and gotten it wrong on purpose. Do not confuse the two. The kid I forgive in a heartbeat. The other thing is a different kind of arithmetic." I thought about Vickers for a long time after we hung up. I knew the way you know things in the Provost Marshal's world, that an incident like this does not stay quiet. A corporal who turns away an incoming commandant becomes a story, and stories like that find their way uphill to people who feel obligated to do something about them. I knew there was a real chance that young man was about to have the worst week of his career, over 90 honest seconds. And I remembered being 22 and certain and wrong, and I remembered how a single person choosing to teach me instead of break me had changed the entire direction of my life. I decided that first night that I was not going to be the reason a young Marine's record carried a black mark for the rest of his service. I would handle it myself, quietly, the way the things that actually change people are almost always handled. But there was another ache underneath all of it, and Yolanda's arithmetic had brought it to the surface, so I made myself look at it. The Assumption of Command ceremony was in 2 days, and my mother was coming. My sister was coming. For the first time in 53 years, Genevieve Seabrook was going to attend a ceremony of mine. Not my commissioning, not a single promotion, not the day I made general. This one. And I knew, with a clarity that did not even hurt anymore, exactly why. This one was impressive enough to be worth the drive. This one had a parade field and a cannon and a building with my name about to go on the door. My mother had finally found a milestone of mine, grand enough to be worth witnessing, and I was grateful and I was sad in the same breath. And I let myself feel both. Before I went to bed that first night, I took a single new pin and pressed it into my father's map, into the spot where this campus sat. A new marker, in his board, in his honor. The next place his younger daughter had been sent to do the hard thing. I stood back and looked at it, all his pins and now mine, and I said, out loud to the empty room, "You would have liked this one, Dad." And I believe wherever the part of him that kept that map in the dark has gone, that he did. The next morning I sent for the Provost Marshal. Desmond Pike came into my office with the careful posture of a man who already knew what I was going to ask about. He confirmed what I had suspected. The gate incident had traveled. Corporal Vickers's chain of command had heard, and they were, in his words, preparing to make an example. There was talk of a formal reprimand, the kind of paper that follows a young Marine and quietly closes doors he does not even know are there yet. "Stop it," I said. Pike paused. "Ma'am? I am not interested in ending a young Marine's career over the worst 90 seconds of his week. I told him. He made a judgment call with the information he had, and the information was incomplete because I deliberately made it incomplete. I drove up in a civilian car, in a civilian jacket with no plates and no placard, specifically so that no one would know who I was. If anyone created that situation, Colonel, it was me. I will not let him carry the weight of a problem I designed. I let that settle. Make the reprimand go away, and then bring him to me. I will handle the rest myself. Pike's mouth moved at the corner, not quite a smile, the look of a man who recognized something. Yes, ma'am, he said. If I may, that is the same answer you gave in Kandahar when one of my soldiers lost a sensitive item and everyone wanted his head. You took the heat and you taught the kid instead. He shook his head. He's still in, by the way. That soldier, he's a first sergeant now. He tells the story. I had not remembered the specific incident until he said it, but I remembered the principle, because the principle was the whole of how I had tried to lead. You can run an organization on fear, and it will obey you, and it will be hollow. Or you can run it on the belief that most people, given the chance, will rise to the level of respect you extend them. I had bet my entire career on the second thing. It had not always paid off. It had paid off often enough. Corporal Cody Vickers arrived at my office that afternoon, braced for the end of everything. I have stood where he stood. I know the particular stillness of a young person waiting to find out how badly they have damaged their own future. He came to attention in front of my desk and held it, his eyes fixed on the wall behind me, his jaw tight. At ease, Corporal, I said. Sit down. He sat on the edge of the chair like it might be taken away. I did not draw it out. I told him, plainly, that there would be no reprimand, that the matter was closed, that he was not in trouble. I watched the disbelief move across his face, and behind it something that looked like the beginning of shame, which is a heavier thing than fear and harder to carry, so I did not leave him in it. I did not call you here to make you feel small, I said. I called you here because I want you to understand what actually happened at that gate. So it is worth something to you, instead of just being the day you got lucky. I leaned forward. You looked at me, and you saw a plain car and a civilian jacket, and you made a decision. That decision was reasonable. It was also wrong. And the lesson is not that you should snap to attention for every sedan that rolls up, because you cannot run a gate on fear of getting it wrong. The lesson is that the people most worth respecting are almost never the ones who arrive demanding it. Real authority usually shows up quietly and lets you make your mistake. Your job is to treat the unremarkable person at your gate with the same baseline courtesy you would give the staff car with the flags, because you will not always know which one you are looking at. I did not need you to recognize my rank, Corporal. I needed you to be decent to a stranger. And the good news is, you were. You were not cruel. You were just certain. Lose a little of the certainty and keep all of the decency, and you will be a fine Marine. He was quiet for a moment. Then he asked the question I had been waiting for, the one that told me he was worth the trouble. Why are you doing this, ma'am? You could have ended me. Because someone did this for me once, I said, when I was your age and just as certain and just as wrong, and because I would rather you remember this than fear me. Fear fades. What you remember, you become. I stood, which brought him to his feet. This stays between us. Go be good at your job. He left my office standing several inches taller than he had come in, and I turned back to the work of taking command of a war college, which was considerable, and did not think about the gate again for the rest of the day. That evening my mother called. She was already managing the ceremony from 200 miles away, the way she managed everything, asking whether the event would be formal enough for the dress she had bought, mentioning in the same breath that Beatrice had just received some surgical award, measuring the two things against each other on the old familiar scale. A year before, even a month before, I might have made myself smaller on that call, might have downplayed the ceremony so she would not be disappointed by it, might have let Beatrice's award sit on top of mine without a word. I did not do that this time. I told her evenly that it would be very formal, that it was a significant day, and that I was glad she was coming. I did not shrink, and I did not inflate. I just stood in the actual size of my own life, on the phone, for once, and let her decide what to do with it. My family drove up the afternoon before the ceremony, and I had arranged for one of my aides to show them the campus before I joined them, partly because I had the unending business of a change of command to finish, and partly, I admit, because I wanted them to see it without me there, to translate it down into something comfortable. I wanted the place to speak for itself. The War College sits on old and serious ground, brick and history and long green walks under trees that were planted before any of us were born. My aide told me afterward how it went, and Sophie filled in the rest with the breathless detail of a 17-year-old who has just seen the future she wants. They were walked through the halls where the portraits of former commandants hang, the lecture rooms where colonels who will someday run the wars of the next 30 years sit and argue strategy, the grounds where the ceremony would be held. And everywhere they went, my mother kept waiting for the moment when it would turn out to be smaller than it looked. She had spent 50 years certain that my world was a modest thing, a uniform and some distant posts, and she kept bracing for the seam to show, for the grandeur to reveal itself as a little provincial, a little less than the medical world she measured everything against. The seam never showed. The place simply kept being exactly as serious as it appeared, hall after hall. And I am told she grew quieter with each one. What undid her composure, my aide said, was not a building. It was a moment on one of the walks when a group of officers coming the other way recognized the incoming commandant's family and came to attention as they passed. Colonels, men and women with chests full of their own ribbons, stopping and bracing because these were the mother and sister and niece of the general about to take command. My mother had never in her life watched the world arrange itself around my name. She had watched it arrange itself around Beatrice, around the title doctor, around the surgical awards, and she had assumed that was the only kind of standing our family would ever produce. Now she stood on a brick walk in the spring and watched accomplished officers come to attention because of who I was, and there was nothing in her practice script for it, and she had no idea what to do with her face. Sophie, on the other hand, knew exactly what to do with hers. My niece was incandescent the entire afternoon. She asked the aide 100 questions. She wanted to know what the students studied and how old they were, and whether any of them had been to war, and whether a person could come here someday if they worked hard enough and started young enough. She stood in the lecture rooms like she was memorizing them. She was, my aide told me, the easiest tour he had ever given, because she wanted all of it so plainly that her wanting filled the silences. 3 generations of my family had looked at my life and seen a detour. Sophie looked at it and saw a door, and she walked through the whole campus already half certain she would come back to it in a uniform of her own. But the moment I keep, the one Beatrice told me herself that night, happened in my study. The tour ended at the commandant's quarters, and while they waited for me, Beatrice wandered into the study, and she saw the corkboard map leaning against the wall. She knew it instantly. She had grown up with that map on the workshop wall in the garage, had walked past it 10,000 times without ever once stopping to read it, had assumed, the way we all assumed about our father, that it was just one of his quiet hobbies, a man and his pins. She stood in my study, and she actually looked at it for the first time in her life. And she understood what she was looking at. Every pin was me. Every marker was a place I had been sent, a course I had finished, a thing our father had been proud enough of to record in the dark where no one would tease him for it. He never told us he did this, Beatrice said when I came in and found her standing in front of it. Her voice was strange, caught between wonder and grief. He didn't do it for us, I said. He did it for himself, so that somewhere in that house there was a true account, even if the kitchen had a different one. I came and stood beside my sister, the two of us looking at our father's handwriting on the little labels. He carried it the same way I carried mine, I told her, privately, where it couldn't be set down on a counter and forgotten. Beatrice did not say anything to that. She just looked at the map a long time, and I watched my brilliant, composed older sister begin to understand, all at once, the shape of a thing our family had chosen not to see, and how long and how quietly our father had refused to look away. My mother spent part of that late afternoon alone. I did not arrange it. She simply drifted off while the others talked, and one of the staff found her sitting by herself on a bench near the parade field, looking at the building where, the next morning, my name would go on the door as commandant. She sat there for a long while in the cooling light, very still, her hands folded in her lap, a 79-year-old woman looking at the visible proof of a life she had spent 5 decades declining to take seriously. I do not know everything that moved through her on that bench, but I know that the certainty she had carried since I was 18 years old, the certainty that I had chosen something small, had nowhere left to stand. The campus had taken it apart, hall by hall, salute by salute, without a single word from me. And when she came back in to join the others, something in her had gone quiet. The particular quiet of a person whose oldest story about you has just stopped being true in front of their eyes. That evening I had them to the commandant's quarters for dinner, the three of us and Beatrice's daughter, Sophie, in the formal rooms of a house that the United States Army had assigned to me. I think the house unsettled my mother in a way she could not have predicted. She had spent 50 years picturing my life as something temporary and small, a uniform and a series of distant posts she did not need to imagine clearly. She had never pictured this, the portraits of former commandants on the walls, the orderly who took her coat, the flag in the corner of my study. She moved through the rooms more quietly than I had ever seen her move. And I understood that she was recalibrating, slowly, against the actual furniture of a life she had decided long ago not to take seriously. Beatrice found me alone in the kitchen after dinner. My sister is not a sentimental woman. Surgeons rarely are. She stood in the doorway for a moment, and then she said without preamble, "I owe you an apology, and I want to do it properly, not the easy way." I put down the dish I was holding. "It is very administrative," she said. "I used to say that, to my colleagues, about you. I said it for years, and I knew it was not true, and I said it anyway because it was easier than explaining what you actually did, and because, if I am being honest, it was easier to be the impressive one if I kept you a little bit small." Her voice did not break, but it thinned. "I was relieved, Hannah. Every time Mom dismissed you, some part of me was relieved it was not me getting dismissed. That is an ugly thing to have felt about my own sister, and I have felt it my whole life, and I am sorry. It was the most honest thing anyone in my family had ever said to me, and I want to tell you that I had a graceful response ready, but I did not. I just stood there in the kitchen of that grand assigned house and felt 30 years shift slightly on their foundation. "Thank you," I said finally, which was inadequate, but it was real. "That cost you something to say. I can tell. It matters that you said it." We did not fall into each other's arms. We are not built that way, either of us. But something that had been clenched between us for a very long time, let go by a single degree, and a single degree, when you have been frozen at the same angle for decades, is an enormous distance. My mother was harder, because of course she was. She did not apologize, not really, not in words, and I had made my peace before they arrived, with the likelihood that she never would. Genevieve Seabrook was 79 years old, and a person does not always learn to dismantle the machinery of 50 years in a single weekend. But late that evening she came and sat beside me on the long sofa, and she folded her hands and she asked me a question. A real one. She asked me what it was that I actually did, in the work, in the years, in the wars. She had never once asked me that. And she sat, and she listened to the answer, and she did not interrupt, to mention Beatrice, and she did not change the subject. And when I was finished, she was quiet for a while, and then she said, "I did not know that." Which was not, "I am sorry." But it was the first time in my life she had admitted there was something about me she had failed to know, and from her, that was a door opening. I set my terms then, gently, because I had decided I was done performing a smaller version of myself, but I had also decided I was not going to spend the rest of our years together relitigating the past. "Mom," I said, "you do not have to understand it. You never have. But I need you to stop calling it a phase. Especially in front of Sophie. She is at the age where she is deciding what a life can be, and I will not have her taught that what I chose was a detour. You can keep your opinion. You cannot keep saying it out loud in front of the next one who might want this." My mother looked at me for a long moment, and I braced for the old reflex, the deflection, the wounded retreat. It did not come. She just nodded once and said, "All right." And I believe she meant it, because Genevieve Seabrook had never in her life said all right to a thing she intended to ignore. Sophie found me last, near midnight, when the others had gone up. My niece was 17, all sharp curiosity and barely contained energy, and she had spent the entire evening watching me the way I had once watched my father. She wanted to know everything. She wanted to know about the schoolhouse, about the deployments, about West Point, about whether they would take a girl like her, about what it took. And then she asked me, almost shyly, whether I would write her a recommendation for a service academy summer program she had found, the kind of thing a young person does when they have started to suspect what they're for. I looked at my sister's daughter, the first person in 3 generations of my family to look at my life and reach toward it instead of away. And I felt my father's map watching us from the study wall. I would be honored, I told her. And I meant the word more completely than I have meant most words in my life. We sat together a while, the 3 women of my family and the girl who would be the 4th, in a room with no old script for the first time I could remember. The silence among us was not the hostile silence of the dinners I grew up with, the silence of things deliberately unsaid. It was a new silence, unpracticed, almost shy, the silence of people who are not yet sure how to be kind to one another, but have decided, finally, to try. The morning of the ceremony came clear and cool, with the kind of light that makes a parade field look like something out of an old painting. I want to describe it to you the way I saw it, because I had waited my whole life for a day I did not know I was waiting for, and I do not want to rush past it. The field was immaculate. The colors stood at the front, the national flag and the organizational standards, snapping in the same wind that had smelled like rain 2 days before, and now smelled only like spring. The staff and the student body assembled in formation. Hundreds of officers, many of them lieutenant colonels and colonels, who would themselves go on to command and to wear stars, the future of the force, standing in ranks on the grass. A military police cordon held the perimeter with quiet precision. The band was in place. There's a gravity to these ceremonies that photographs never quite capture. A sense of an institution, older than any of the people in it, was pausing to mark a passage of authority. And that gravity settled over the field as the minutes counted down. Lieutenant General Harriet Stone arrived to preside. She came from the higher headquarters that the War College answered to, a 3-star general with a long and serious record, and she had asked to be the one to officiate, which I had been told was not nothing. We had served in adjacent worlds for years, without ever being stationed together, and she greeted me with the easy respect of one professional for another, and then she went to take her place, and I went to take mine. I was in my Army service uniform, the dark blue coat and trousers, the 2 silver stars of a major general on each shoulder, and on my left breast the rows of ribbons I had spent 32 years earning and a lifetime not mentioning at family dinners, the bronze stars, the Legion of Merit, the record of the places my father had pinned to his map in the dark. For once they were not hidden under a travel jacket. For once I stood in full view of everyone, exactly the size I actually was. My family was in the front row. I could see them from where I stood. My mother in the dress she had fretted over for a week, sitting very straight, taking in the formation and the cannon and the hundreds of officers and the weight of the whole thing with an expression I had never seen on her face before. Beatrice beside her, composed, watchful. And Sophie, leaning forward in her seat, drinking all of it in, already half a soldier in her heart. And in the cordon, at the edge of the field, stood Corporal Cody Vickers. He had asked, Pike told me later, to be assigned to the detail for the ceremony. He did not have to. He could have spent the day anywhere else on the post and been glad of the distance from the woman he had waved away at the gate. Instead, he had asked to be here, standing his post, doing it right this time, in full view of the consequence of his mistake. When my eyes found him in the line, he did not flinch and he did not look away. He met my gaze for half a second and something passed between us. An acknowledgement, the lesson kept, the dignity intact on both sides, and then we both returned our attention to where it belonged. Then Lieutenant General Stone stepped to the podium, and she began to read my record aloud to the assembled formation, and the field went still. She read it the way these things are read, the dates and the postings and the commands, the deployment to Iraq in 2003, the year in Afghanistan, the brigade I had led, the schools, the distinguished graduate returned to this very college as a student in 2014. She read the years my family had called a phase as what they actually were, a record of consequence, spoken in a strong, clear voice in front of hundreds of officers and a presiding general and a parade field and the spring sky. Every line of it was a year I had once sat silent through at a dinner table. Every posting was a thing I had not mentioned, a pride I had kept where it could not be set down on a counter. And now it was being read aloud as a citation, as the reason this institution was passing its colors to me. And there was nowhere in any of it, for the word administrative to stand. I watched my mother's hand rise slowly to her mouth. I do not know exactly what moved through Genevieve Seabrook in that front row as she listened to a 3-star general recite the life she had spent 5 decades declining to see. I only know that her hand came up and her eyes shone, and she sat absolutely motionless as the record went on. And the question that I had carried my whole life seemed to hang in the cool air over the field. What do you do when the thing you dismissed turns out to be the thing that mattered? What do you do when you have spent 50 years calling something small and you are made to sit in a place of honor and hear it read as something large? General Stone's voice carried on toward its conclusion, and she said, "And so it is fitting that she returns to command the institution that once taught her." And the field held its breath, and the moment stood on its edge, not yet finished, about to become whatever it was going to become. And then it became the best moment of my life, and I want to tell you about it plainly because it did not arrive the way I once imagined moments like this would arrive. The colors were passed. That is the heart of the ceremony, the physical handing of the organizational flag from the higher commander to the new one, the visible transfer of authority that every soldier on that field understood in their bones. Lieutenant General Stone placed the standard in my hands, and I took it, and I assumed command of the War College, and the formation rendered honors to its new commandant. Hundreds of officers, the rising leadership of the entire army, came to attention for me on a field in the spring light. The institution my mother had dismissed for 30 years now answered to me. I held the colors, and I felt my father somewhere very close. And I did not cry, because I had a formation in front of me and a duty to perform, but I felt the whole long arc of it settle into place. And it was not triumph that I felt. It was peace. A deep, quiet, final peace, the kind that does not need anyone to lose in order for you to have won. The receiving line came afterward, and my mother reached me in it. She stood in front of me in her careful dress, and for a moment neither of us knew what to do with our hands, 2 people who had never quite learned the choreography of tenderness. And then Genevieve Seabrook looked up at her younger daughter, the soldier, the general, the commandant, and she said, "I am proud of you, Hannah." Plainly, with no comparison to Beatrice, with no qualifier, no phase, no "someday you will come to your senses" folded into the back of it. Just the 4 words I had stopped expecting to hear somewhere around my 40th birthday. I am proud of you. And it landed in me, quietly, and it was enough. It did not erase 50 years. Nothing erases 50 years. But it was real, and it was hers, and she had finally found her way to it, and I let it be enough. Behind her, Beatrice caught my eye and gave me a small nod, and I understood that my sister had heard it too, had stood close enough to witness our mother say the words at last, and that she was glad, with no relief left in it this time, and no part of her hoping the attention would have been hers. The old arithmetic that had sat between the 3 of us for half a century had finally changed its sign. It had taken a parade field to do it. But it had been done, and I would take it, having long ago stopped believing the day would come at all. Corporal Vickers came through the line too, near the end. He stopped in front of me, and he came to attention, and he saluted, sharply, correctly, and I returned it, and neither of us said a single word, because none was needed. The gate was closed cleanly. A young man had made a mistake and learned from it and shown up to stand in front of it, and an old soldier had chosen to teach instead of break, and there was a small private smile between us as he moved on, and that was the whole of it, and it was complete. That evening, back at the commandant's quarters, with the uniform finally off and the house quiet in a good way now, Sophie found me in the study in front of my father's map. She had been looking at it. She asked me about the pins, and I told her what each one was, and whose hand had pressed them in, and why a high school history teacher had kept a private record of his daughter's life in a garage where no one would see it. My niece listened to all of it. And then she asked if she could add one. I gave her a pin, and she pressed it into the spot where the summer program she had applied to was held. Her own first marker, the next generation adding to the board, and I stood there beside my sister's daughter and looked at my father's handwriting on the old labels and felt the whole thing come full circle in a way that did not hurt at all. So here is what I have learned, and I am telling it to you because if you have made it this far, some of it may be yours too. The people who love you should not need you to be impressive in order to see you. They should not require a parade field and a presiding general and a record read aloud before they are willing to look. And if the people who share your name spend years telling you that you are at the wrong gate, you do not have to wait at that gate forever, and you do not have to burn it down on your way past it either. You can simply pull aside and keep driving and become, fully and without apology, the person they told you not to be. The quietest revenge is not making them watch you win. It is no longer needing them to. The recognition will come, or it will not, and either way you will have done the hard thing and run toward the noise, and you will find, when you finally arrive, that the peace was never in their approval. It was in the becoming. It was in the map on the wall, and the new pins your own people press into it, and the long, clear morning when you stand exactly the size you are, and nobody, anywhere, tells you that you are at the wrong gate. Thank you for staying with me all the way to the end of this one. I spent so many years believing that if I just achieved enough, the people who dismissed me would finally see me. And what I learned is that approval you have to earn from your own family was never really about love. The peace came when I stopped needing it. So let me ask you a few things. Have you ever had someone who should have believed in you call your whole life a phase? Did the truth ever surface on its own, quietly, in front of the people who doubted you? And if you had been me, would you have protected that young Marine at the gate? Or would you have let him face the consequences? I would love to read your answers in the comments. If this story meant something to you, hit subscribe and stay a while.